This video is about the continuing role that housing plays as a base to receive care and improve health outcomes for persons living with HIV/AIDS. Fortunately for many, the advances in HIV treatments allow participants to better manage their health and address HIV as a chronic condition. Unfortunately for persons in unstable situations, especially persons who are homeless, access to this care is not easy to maintain, and with AIDS, issues of discrimination, stigma, and poor connections to health remain tremendous barriers. This program is to help you consider what can be done in your community to broaden our caring networks. It is also to help promote ways to break down these barriers for disadvantaged households. The National HIV/AIDS Strategy recognizes the importance of stable housing as a cornerstone to enable effective participation in treatment for persons living with HIV. The strategy notes how HIV infection tends to disproportionately affect the same populations most impacted by forms of housing discrimination: those households who are poor, of minority, sexual, or gender identity groups, and/or those who are racial or ethnic minorities. There are also other barriers for persons with substance abuse issues, mental illness, and past records of incarceration. Under the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, a number of programs can provide this space in making housing affordable. One special program is the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS program. HOPWA uniquely targets affordable housing with links to comprehensive services in order to meet the complex needs of low-income persons living with HIV/AIDS. Along with HUD's homeless assistance and community development efforts, these housing programs rely on the community to plan, operate, and evaluate the efficiency and effectiveness of the programs. If not already involved, I encourage you to learn more about participating in these efforts. Stable housing is the cornerstone to health, but appropriate and affordable housing opportunities for persons living with HIV/AIDS, especially persons who are very low income, are often limited. There are a wide variety of means and resources available to communities for the expansion of housing opportunities. However, the development of housing resources can be a complex and resource-intensive process. What are the options for developing housing resources? What kinds of models work? What financial resources are out there to fund housing development? What are some of the challenges and risks for an organization that wants to create housing opportunities? These questions and more were discussed in the HIV Roundtable Symposium featured in this video. The presenters featured discussed their own experiences developing housing opportunities for persons living with HIV/AIDS. They discussed resources, risks, models, and successes. The Roundtable Symposium, from which the following presentations were taken, was a collaboration between HUD's Office of HIV/AIDS Housing, HUD's Baltimore Field Office, HUD's Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, the White House, other federal agencies, along with beneficiaries, clients, advocates, and service providers. Please join us in challenges to developing successful, supportive AIDS housing programs. Thank you.
I wanted to ask the question, why are we here? Why would you come to a meeting like this? Now, first of all, I know, and I thank the panelists who are going to be speaking. We know you know a lot about what can be done in the community, and we really are privileged that you have agreed to speak to us today. I know my colleagues in the other parts of the department. We also started to know that it's not one office, it's not just one thing, it's how the whole thing works. And so in addition to the different parts of HUD represented here today, the other parts of the federal government, HHS, labor, justice, Veterans Affairs, and importantly the White House, which we're going to hear something about the National AIDS Strategy and what that means for us to do more. And I think you're here today too because you know that we need to do more. The issues of poverty and homelessness are now linked with HIV. And if we don't delink them and get people with HIV in stable housing and stable life situations, it's going to be devastating for them, and it is still for too many. And we can do something about that because we know so much about some of the solutions. We know that if you manage this, it can be a managed health crisis, a managed health situation, and better life outcomes for our clients. And so housing is really an important part of that, and I want to thank you for agreeing to be part of that discussion. How do you do? Yeah, just click this. Okay. Well, there's the copies of this PowerPoint on your desk, so I won't go through all of it. But the real message is housing is part of the solution. And if we can help people get out of unstable situations, we can link them to care and make them participate in care in a significant way. Another aspect of this is disparities. So much about the issues of AIDS and poverty and homelessness is about disparities in our communities, and you know that in your own community. It's people who are not getting into care or staying in care in a meaningful way, retaining care. That's an important challenge for us. And one thing that really struck me, I guess I'm hitting the wrong button. Forward, I got it. In talking with Dr. Fauci, this 30th year of AIDS, something he said that really struck me as important. That, first of all, we have science that tells us what we can do. But when we look at treatment and care in this nation, only 19% of Americans living with HIV are getting optimal treatment with their viral loads completely suppressed. And so many are challenged just to access care in a way that is meaningful in the other parts of their lives, as I said, to find stable housing, to link to services as needed, to be reunited to family. The other aspect of today's discussion is about the other challenges. HIV is also linked to stigma, discrimination, misunderstanding, fear, prejudice, and all those things that prevent people from getting care. And we can do something about that. So in meeting with our Assistant Secretary, Mercedes Marquez, who would send her remarks too, she asked our two offices, the faith-based office and my office of HIV/AIDS housing, what can we do together that would help promote understanding, that would promote better results? And we decided that we'd try to outreach to our neighbors and our communities to do something. And one thing that those of us at headquarters are trying to learn, and we're not yet there yet totally, is that it's not here in Washington, but it's in the cities and the states and communities and neighborhoods where it happens. So we're so privileged that our Baltimore field office has joined us. Because it's not us at HUD, it's you and your community accessing our resources, accessing other resources to make a difference in your own community. And even if you don't actually run one of our programs, you can actually be really important to us as we do that collaboration and work to get the results and improve the results over time. And as Carol said, just do something, get started. And what we can do at HUD is we can pay for rental assistance, we can help develop community residences, we can help make sure they are continuing, we can help make sure that they link to services, we can help with community planning and helping your organizations understand the challenges, we can provide technical assistance, and we can help work with you on service coordination. And what you can do with us, even if you don't run these programs for us, is you can help connect clients to care. Because it isn't just about programs and government, it's about the human aspect. And so much about the faith-based work that has taught me in my work in managing programs is that sometimes people don't connect to care. And it's often the faith community that helps those people get through that connection, helps them understand that the road to recovery is available, and helps them and keeps them on the path to recovery.
Stable housing is critical for public health, especially for people living with HIV and AIDS. And then, in fact, stable housing was listed both, as I think Jeff Crowley mentioned, in the National HIV and AIDS Strategy and the National Prevention Strategy. And I would go so far as to say that if a person doesn't have stable housing, all other concerns, particularly those related to treatment adherence or health care, tend to fall by the wayside. And I think Malcolm Coley put it best. that it's just very difficult if you have the opportunity to access your medications. If you don't have housing, it's going to probably impede your ability to be adherent to those medications.
What you'll find is that us bankers, all we think is bottom line. But there comes a point where you have to do what's best humanistically. And so to overcome the stigma, what FAME did, we didn't hold a committee meeting. We didn't go into the community and say, what do you guys think about this? Because we knew what they thought, because we're part of the community and we know the comments and the views and the perceptions. We just did what we knew what was right. And so what we did was, now the banker is coming back, what was very difficult was finding a funding partner. Finding a funding partner in the middle of South Central to build a development for individuals living with HIV was tougher than nails. It was very, 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 very tough. But we received about 50 to 60% through the low-income housing tax credit, and that's how we sort of seduced the developer to come in and help develop the Eugene Manor. We're the development arm of the church itself. I'm not a member of the church, but I do have faith. I'm not a total heathen either. Before I get into what I have written down, I just want to know by a show of hands, how many represent organizations that already have a development existing for individuals, have a development, a housing development for individuals that are living with HIV? How many are interested in finding out how to get a development created? Okay, all right, so now I know how to tailor my comments, okay. FAME Assistance Corporation started in '92, but the FAME Housing Corporation started in 1988. First A.M.E is one of the oldest, largest African-American churches located in Los Angeles. It has a membership of over 19,000. Through that large membership base, FAME was able to work with local, state, federal government to get the housing development created. For individuals that do not belong to a large organization, I was talking to Mr. Sherwood earlier, as well as the doctor here, and we were talking about the different challenges that organizations face right now. One of the challenges FAME had earlier on, being an African-American church in South Central Los Angeles, the stigma of HIV/AIDS was certainly there, but FAME, our motto actually is first to serve. So the way we overcame that stigma was simply to do what we knew what was right. And as she alluded earlier, I'm a recovering banker, and I can't believe I'm about to say this because the banker in me is just cringing and rolling over. It's not all about the money. Can't believe I just, It's not all about the money, and what you'll find is that us bankers, all we think is bottom line. But there comes a point where you have to do what's best humanistically. And so to overcome the stigma, what FAME did, we didn't hold a committee meeting. We didn't go into the community and say, what do you guys think about this? Because we knew what they thought, because we're part of the community and we know the comments and the views and the perceptions. We just did what we knew what was right. And so what we did was, now the banker is coming back, what was very difficult was finding a funding partner. Finding a funding partner in the middle of South Central to build a development for individuals living with HIV was tougher than nails. It was very, 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 very tough. But we received about 50 to 60% through the low-income housing tax credit, and that's how we sort of seduced the developer to come in and help develop the Eugene Manor, which it houses 38 for individuals, but our total portfolio of real estate is actually 320 units. But we have about 10% of that dedicated to the Eugene Manor. The other challenge was finding a good location. We wanted to make sure we found a location that was readily accessible to public transportation. Los Angeles is a big area. And if you've ever been, you understand if you don't have a car, you're almost dead in water. So we had to make sure that the location was near the bus stops and the freeways as well. I mentioned how difficult the finance part was, but we were able to secure $1 million from the Los Angeles County Division for Housing. We were able to secure $1 million from Los Angeles City, and we had $3 million plus come in form of a LIHTC. And then we had another $500,000 that was given as sort of soft cost, I guess you would say, for the development of the project that also went to the developer itself. And speaking to Mr. Sherwood earlier as well, I wanted to just state, when you want to do a development, make sure that if you do not have the professional help on the inside, that you go out and seek it. Your jobs are hard enough to go out and do what's right for the individuals that you serve. Going to a bank without having the expertise, going to an organization trying to get new markets tax credits or getting LIHTC, it is going to be that much more difficult if you do not have outside help, someone that knows how to properly manage properties and real estate. One of the questions, one of my talking points was talking about how do we successfully maintain the buildings and the developments once they're created. Because we're large, we have our own property management group. But I would encourage you to find a property management group, invite the president, vice president to sit on a board. This is the cheapest, most effective way to get free help from individuals, is to give them a title, make them feel like, you know, like they have some input. You bring that person to be a part of the board, and that person then can in turn give you the assistance that you need for a deep discount, if not for free. And it's another talking point, how did we maintain our governmental relationships? And I can only say, instead of reading all of this, do what you say you're going to do. In a time of constrained capital and cash flow, all of your funders, whether they be private or public, everybody is strapped for cash, right? So the way that you maintain that relationship is simply deliver on what you say that you are going to do. And just fight like holy hell to make sure that you can deliver and have constant communication. If something is going wrong with the project or you're not going to be able to meet your deliverables, do not wait until the last minute to tell the financing partner. Don't wait until the last minute to talk to the partners themselves. You know, you go out and you create that communication. And it says, what are the dominant lessons learned from FAME's development experience? Make sure you have good partners and make sure that you have the money. One of the worst things that you could do is start a development and have a lot of unforeseen development costs that actually sink a lot of your capital reserves, because at the end of the development, while you have this nice edifice, this building here, and you're prepared to do the service for the clients or the residents in that facility, if you don't have operating capital after it's built, you're going to be dead in the water. It says future housing projects. FAME now has developed what we're calling Project Saver Homes. And on the surface, it would sound as if it's a loss mitigation, preventing foreclosure. It's actually the opposite, because loss mitigation and foreclosure prevention is very defensive. So what we've come to realize is if we help prepare individuals in our community to be better with their finances, that in and of itself will be enough to help them stave off foreclosure. Most often, individuals living in low to moderate income communities do not understand personal finance, which is how they get into so much debt and credit card trouble, and they get the car repossessed. So we've developed a program that will allow them not only to purchase a home, but to go through a 12-month educational component, which will allow them to build up the basic financial fundamentals so that they can properly manage finances and actually help their family to succeed.
We've been around since 1886, when the organization actually split away from the Salvation Army. The founders were the son and daughter-in-law of the founder of the Salvation Army. So the organization's been around, and it's always been sort of predicated on the same mission as the Salvation Army. It's very much a mission of service. It is a faith-based church, nonprofit corporation, and we work nationally. We have 37 affiliates around the country, almost an affiliate in every major metropolitan area. I work at the national office, which is here in Alexandria, Virginia, and my role is for housing development. Personally, I've been involved in housing development since about 1976, all of it in affordable housing, and sort of all across the board, everything from senior housing to farm labor housing to family housing and permanent supportive housing, which is obviously the topic of this discussion. We have about 370 properties around the country with 17,000 units. And the most properties we have are actually senior housing and most units. The second most properties we have are permanent supportive housing. They're traditionally much smaller than our senior housing projects are, so the average unit count is anywhere in some cases between 6 and 30 units or so, but we find that that's really one of the greatest needs that our organization can do. I mentioned our affiliate offices. They are primarily what I'd call the touch organizations. They're the ones that provide the services to the residents, to the communities, and that can take any form from everything basically from Meals on Wheels to foster care, children aging out of foster care, prisoner reentry, all different types, but particularly also HIV/AIDS residents. Our greatest funding program, frankly, in the past, most of what we were able to use as far as funding sources were the HUD 811 program, which is still a strong program, although, of course, we're seeing some of the funding being cut with that. But just to give you a little flavor, we have developed a few properties that were specifically for individuals with HIV/AIDS. Those were all done more toward the middle to late 90s or so. And as treatments improve for individuals with HIV/AIDS, we more or less made a decision that we could treat them more in the general permanent supportive housing facilities rather than dedicating properties strictly for them. So as a result, what we've been focusing on is developing more general permanent supportive housing and frankly, just lately, a large focus on veterans housing. And this is permanent supportive housing for vets that are coming out of the VA hospital system, many of them homeless and many of them afflicted with HIV/AIDS. Right now under construction, we have a 40-unit general population permanent supportive housing property in Toledo, and a second property, 50 units in Chicago, that is particularly dedicated to vets. But we are working on another project in Los Angeles and Martise's area, one in Omaha, a second one in Chicago, and one in Shreveport, Newport News, and Cape Coral, Florida. So we've seen a huge uptick in I'd say the commitment in many cases of trying to house vets, particularly those that need permanent supportive housing, and many of them with need of heavy case management. And we've seen that as a particular area that there are some financial resources that are available that we can go ahead and actually get some of these properties built. As you can tell, my talk's going to be kind of tailored to the hard real estate, I guess, if you will, and what it takes to actually get it built. But I also want to talk about some of the particular challenges involved and how that plays into mission and everything else. First of all, if you make the decision that your organization wants to provide permanent supportive housing, you've obviously got to have that mission, and you've got to have that commitment because it is not an easy job to do. As I said, my experience is all across the board on affordable housing, and it's tough enough to locate even a senior property that is designed for low-income seniors, let alone any that are for families, special needs folks, whether HIV/AIDS or former offenders or could be sex offenders. We have a few properties that were actually designed for that. You can just imagine the community challenges you run into and such. One of the good news portions of that is there actually are some funding resources. In some cases, there's such commitment there either by community organizations or in some cases governments to try to help these populations that there are financial resources there for it. But I'd say there's 4 principal things you need to be worried about. One of them is funding. A second one, feasibility. A third one, sustainability. And lastly, community acceptance. Which maybe should be first, but I'll cover that one last because it's a good setup for Ms. Nat'l. capital to construct or funding, I think, is probably the first thing. And Martise mentioned the low-income housing tax credit program. Frankly, that's the driver for much of what we're able to do in our programs. And with that program, it's an allocation of tax credits you get from a state housing finance agency, which we then resell, which creates equity to be able to build a property. And one of the things we've seen just in the last few years is the larger, more conservative financial institutions, which are typically buyers of low-income housing tax credits, become more accepting of permanent supportive housing tax credit projects. That was not the case, say, 5 years or so ago, and we are finding that there's more interest in their situation of buying credits now. The other types of funding we usually go to is the home program, whether it's administered by a state or by the city. Federal Home Loan Bank is another good source. Housing trust funds, if your state or your city has those. We've been very successful finding donated land in some communities. Chicago has actually been very supportive of doing these types of properties with donated land. Martise mentioned, I think you had land available. Churches are another excellent source. There's many community churches that have extra land. Could be either through donations or it could be unused facilities, but there's an opportunity in those situations to buy or have land donated. Tax abatements, foundations, those are all sources, but one of the things that seems to be a common thread is at the end of the day, you're going to have 5 or 6 different funding sources to be able to pull together enough capital to actually build your property. The second piece is tenant subsidies, and that kind of goes to feasibility. One thing that you'll find across the board is that your residents aren't going to have high incomes, and that's kind of a given, but obviously, if you're going to own and operate a property, you're going to have enough income to be able to operate it. And that's where tenant subsidies come into play. And frankly, this is where HUD and VA come into play, VA particularly when we're talking about veterans properties. But there's a definite need to have some type of tenant subsidy in place, usually through the project-based voucher program, or in the case now, VASH vouchers, that will, in order to or enable residents to be able to have enough income to be able to afford the rents and therefore be able to cover the cost of the property. The third piece is sustainability, and there I'll flip Martise around and say underwriting is extremely important. And you have to make sure that your property is going to cash flow successfully and will cash flow for 10, 15, 20 years out. It's one thing to have mission, but if you're 3 years into a property and you're suffering losses every year, and you can't fill that gap through donations or through the congregations and such, you're going to be out of business before you know it. So putting on the green eye shades and looking at these deals hard when you're putting it together, understanding what your funding sources are going forward, that's really a critical issue. And the funding sources mean also the service dollars, and that's one of sort of the third leg of the stool, if you will, for permanent supportive housing. The money to construct the property, the tenant subsidies that the residents will need, and the third piece being how are you going to pay for the case management of the individuals that are going to be there. Case with VASH vouchers, you actually get enough money to provide for one case manager for 25 residents for every 25 VASH vouchers you have. So there are some sources out there that are dependable. Your local community organizations might be the others. And then lastly, I mentioned acceptance, and that truly is one of the big sort of tough nuts to crack. We probably run into NIMBYism on 50% or more of the cases we get into, the communities we get into. So addressing the community acceptance before you get too deep into a property is critical. And you'd be amazed what you run into too. Even with veterans projects and all of the support that seems to be out there today for veterans and community support you might get at the city council level and such. When you say that this is a neighborhood you're going to be into and these are previously homeless vets with substance abuse issues or something like that, we still run into problems with the local neighborhood and the neighborhood associations that we have to fight. So I think that's extremely important to address early on. And I'll just sort of close my portion with some good news in that I mentioned we're doing a permanent supportive housing property for veterans in Shreveport. And we had our community meeting last night, which is actually the first one to sort of introduce this concept to the community. And the meeting went so well that it ended with a prayer for the success of the property going forward. So some good news out there.
AIDS Interfaith Residential Services, which we have shortened and we affectionately call AIRS, was started by the Sisters of Mercy and the Central Maryland Ecumenical Council in the late 80s as the faith-based community's response to HIV at the time. And we essentially started with who were very, very sick individuals with a program called the Don Miller House, which is an assisted living facility that we operate and is still very much our flagship program. The organization's been around for about 22 years. We serve approximately 400 individuals and families who are infected, affected, and at risk of HIV and AIDS. We operate with a $3 million annual operating budget and have a staff of about 45 that provide supportive services, case management, and linkages to a number of other services. Essentially, between 1988 and about 2000, the organization's focus was about dealing with people who were dying with HIV and AIDS. And then from about 2001 to current day, the focus became about people who were living with HIV and AIDS. And so a big part of our focus was about self-sufficiency and what's required to do that. Things like workforce development and continuing education. So once the housing and everything was in place, it was important to get people kind of thinking about what's the next step now that, you know, it was that period of time where medications were advancing and that people were living longer and that folks could start thinking about a life after a diagnosis. So we specialize in serving special populations. Particularly, we work with Hispanic populations, with ex-offenders, and now, most recently, we've been really focusing on youth. We've gotten quite a bit of federal funding. In fact, the special populations that we are working with are HOPWA-funded SPINS projects, special projects of national significance, that have ultimately become permanent projects beyond the demonstration period. Around 2005, AIRS was doing, you know, as a housing organization, the case managers were also kind of acting as housing counselors, and we recognized that that really wasn't the most effective way to ensure that our clients stayed housed, which was really, you know, our preliminary goal. And so, at that time, I was the deputy director, and I was in graduate school, and I was looking for a project, and I liked real estate, and I thought, well, why don't we look at, you know, creating an entity that specifically focuses on property development and management, specifically because it requires a certain skill set for the development and management. The board needed to have a certain type of background and so forth, and it was very different than the case management. We were also seeing that that was also a more effective way of dealing with the clients because it was very difficult for case managers to be an advocate for a client on one hand and then say, I got to have your rent on the other. So the EHM side was very happy to say, I got to have your rent, okay? And so EHM was really created as a social enterprise, while AIRS does a lot of requests of federal funding and funding from private sources. EHM is almost completely covered through property management fees, development fees, and the like. So again, it was created so that it would be a self-sustaining organization. It also has about a $3 million annual operating budget and about 15 staff, mostly related to property management and have that property management expertise. So they deal with intake and determining eligibility and rent collection and property management and leasing coordination. Malcolm's on my staff. So we deal with everything related to housing. One of the things that is unique about the way that we do our property management is that we do what we call case management, sensitive property management. All of our property managers, they have all the HQS certifications and all those typical things, but they also have an understanding of the special needs and circumstances that our clients come from that a typical property manager does not necessarily. So what it's done for us is helped us to create a healthy tension between property and case management so that we are both advocating for the benefit of the resident. But more importantly, it's created a great sense of communication between our property team and our case management team that ultimately helps to keep the person housed for a longer period of time. We do more frequent inspections than a regular property manager. So if you lease an apartment, you know that maybe your landlord might look once a year. Well, we do quarterly inspections. And during those inspections, not only are we looking at the facilities, but we're looking at, does the client have all the things they need? Is there food in the refrigerator? Are there things that are not there or that are signs that this person may be falling off track? And so those things are communicated to the case manager, for example, and is the way that we are able to be proactive and help the client stay housed longer. The housing model that we use is a scattered site model. It is units scattered throughout Baltimore City and County. We've done this because although it is more difficult and expensive to manage from a property management standpoint, it is a way to give our residents the most choice in where they want to live. Particularly in Baltimore, we've got clients that don't want to live in certain parts of the city because they've had histories of using or so forth in that area, and they don't want to be back there. And so we're happy to put them in a place, again, where they're going to be more successful. Our tenants pay 30% of their income, and they, really we're looking for people when they're coming in that are able to live independently. Self-sufficiency, as I said, is the goal of what we're looking to do. So workforce development, continuing education, connecting to those things is the way we move forward. Our operating subsidies are like everyone else's. We use HOPWA, Shelter Plus Care, SHP, TLP, Section 8, you name it. We use it to operate the properties and subsidize the rents for the residents that we serve. Our capital dollars, again, are like what you heard earlier, HUD 811. A number of our projects are HUD 811 projects. We've used HOPWA capital, home money, low-income housing tax credit, CDBG, and NSP as a way to develop the properties. So essentially, EHM's role is to respond to the programmatic needs of what programs need in the form of housing. And so if you look on your table, there's a brochure of one of our new projects, and this is an example of how we respond to the needs of what program says we need. So in keeping with our history and work in HIV, one of the things that we saw was a leading contributor to the high numbers of infection for individuals in Baltimore City was that there were a lot of young people. For us, we're focusing on ages 18 to 24 because that's when we can legally house them. And I think you heard in some of the data on the earlier panel about how that population is still disproportionately impacted, that the numbers are way too high. So we created an innovative project called Restoration Gardens, and you can read through it and it'll tell you who all of the partners and so forth are, that focuses on housing homeless and unstably housed young people ages 18 to 24. It's the only project of its kind in the state of Maryland. Took about $6 million to do. Was really done by the grace of God because it started off as a tax credit project when the market was going south and ended up as a neighborhood stabilization project and good old stimulus dollars. Thank you, President Obama. But we were able to create a unique project that otherwise would not have existed and is now serving as a model. We're being contacted from around the country from individuals that want to know how we do it. Even when we started this 5 years ago was right at the time when EHM was starting. And so I think Martise maybe even spoke about, we didn't have the capacity to do a project that was as complex as this. And so what we needed to do was seek a partner, even though we were a developer. So we needed to have somebody that had the understanding of all of the intricate financing tools that were needed to do it, and also had the financial capacity so that our biggest funders would feel comfortable that we were in good company. company and that we would be able to get the job done. It was the best thing that we did. It was an excellent partnership. They were also a nonprofit developer. They shared our vision, and we still are very much the lead. We are the owners and operators of the project. So it's a project that we're very proud of. It is a complete example of collaboration. There were lots of this. Not only did this meet needs for heirs, but it met needs of what's called the Baltimore Homeless Youth Initiative, which is made up of like 20 youth organizations that all recognize that housing or lack of housing was a barrier to them having successful clients, GED programs, workforce development programs. You can't focus on anything if you have to worry about where you're going to lay your head. So we believe that housing is the first and foremost thing, and so we're very happy to be engaged in it. In terms of other community engagement activities, we do lots of projects with the state. We're doing something now called Partnership for Life that enables us to do more outreach. We're a housing organization. Outreach wasn't really what we did, but now we found that we have to do it because people think it's not a crisis anymore, unfortunately. And so we've had to build that in as a part of the work that we do in terms of communicating to folks that it's not over, folks. You know, we still need the attention and focus locally on the issues and the fact that we are disproportionately impacted, and that, you know, that there's still work to be done. And so we work with our local universities and other aid service organizations to do a number of large-scale outreach activities and testing. One of our really cool things that we do with our youth is that we have what are called service navigators. These are young people that operate with cell phones and laptops, and they're very mobile, and they're meeting young people where they are. In fact, I think at the Enoch Pratt Library, which is our largest library, they think that one of our navigators has an office there, but that's where a lot of homeless young people come, and so he's able to connect with them. He's able to lead them to our Youth Resource Center, which is a part of this continuum of youth services that we provide. And when they come in, they're looking for housing, but that's our opportunity to help them understand what their status is and to connect them to other types of services that they need. And because they want housing, they continue to come back, and that gives us the opportunity to continue to work with them as it relates to their status and anything else. And so we've been able to bring, you know, to create things out of necessity to meet the needs, but we've done it very strategically with, you know, very well thought out, we think, ways of putting it together to meet, you know, a need that wasn't otherwise being met. So again, like Heather, I'll be open for questions after the presentations.
I'm Allison Nickel, and as you heard earlier, I do have some extraordinarily long titles. But what you need to know about me is that I am a civil rights lawyer, and I sue people for a living, and I am extraordinarily good at it. So that's where the whole warm and fuzzy part goes out. And my remarks are going to be brief, but I want to thank you know, I've been in and around the federal government as a civil rights lawyer doing work on HIV and AIDS issues for like 157 years. And in that time, I can truly tell you I have seen the best that government can offer, and I have seen the worst. And I feel extraordinarily lucky and blessed to be working in the Justice Department for Eric Holder and Tom Perez, who's the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, and for a President of the United States who cares enough to talk about this issue publicly, to have an Office of National AIDS Policy staffed with an extraordinary staff of people who could not be more committed to these issues, and who cares enough to have a national AIDS strategy and engage the entire structure of the federal government in working on this issue. So with that as background, what I want to stress today is I want people to remember that living free of discrimination and stigma is a civil rights issue. There are still civil rights issues that are unresolved around this virus and the way that people are treated, including with respect to, although not exclusively, with respect to housing. There are 3 major civil rights laws that protect people with HIV and AIDS from discrimination: in employment, education, the provision of government services, access to medical care, the full range of things that people engage in their lives. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the Rehabilitation Act, and the Fair Housing Act, which is probably of most interest to the people in this room. The Justice Department, where I work, enforces all of these civil rights laws. So if you have a client who comes in and says, you know, I just lost my job, they found out I have HIV, and yes, that does still happen, although in smaller numbers than it used to, that's a potential act of discrimination. That person needs to file a complaint of discrimination against their employer, or if they're turned away from a doctor's office or a dentist's office that says, you know, I don't treat people with HIV. That's not acceptable anymore. And there are remedies within the law. I think part of the disconnect with people getting to understand that, and we do think that HIV discrimination is still very much underreported, is because of the use of the word disability. And people with HIV, in the absence of any other medical conditions, don't necessarily think of themselves as disabled. They think of the disabled as people who use wheelchairs, who are amputees, who are disabled veterans, who are blind, who are deaf. But for legal purposes, people with the virus, whether they have symptoms or not, and people with AIDS are in fact covered by the disability discrimination laws. And so I'm trying to get that word out. One of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about is with respect to housing. Well, we see a lot of discrimination in zoning. You want to build one of these housing complexes, you want to build a care facility or a medical care facility for people with HIV, you are going to likely encounter resistance within the community, and the local zoning board may turn down your permit. That can be a provable act of discrimination. If they're saying you can't have this kind of medical facility or housing facility here because it's going to serve a population of people with HIV and AIDS, that is a potential act of discrimination if that is proven to be the reason. The zoning issues can be addressed both under the Americans with Disabilities Act, also under the Fair Housing Act. And the only reason that makes a difference is that it makes a difference where you file the complaint. We have now made it at the Justice Department, it has never been easier to file a complaint of discrimination at the Justice Department. We have a dedicated webpage, www.ada/AIDS. If you go to that webpage, the second click is how to file a complaint. So this is a one-click process. You go to ADA/AIDS, you click on complaint, you can file your complaint directly on the website with us. So we're hoping that this kind of virtual access that people will now have to being able to file discrimination complaints will help us with our drill down work in trying to get the message out to people that, that you can in fact file complaints of discrimination with the federal government. With respect to a housing issue, you file that the way you would any other kind of housing issue. You file it with HUD within 100 days. If they can't resolve it, they send it to the Justice Department housing section, and those are the people that engage in first negotiations and usually a lawsuit with people in order to resolve that. I think our greatest challenge at the Justice Department is finding these cases at the granular level. I think people who are discriminated against, there's still a lot of stigma associated with this virus, as there are with many other disabilities. People are engaged in trying to live their life. You lose your job, your focus is getting another job. You can't get housing, your focus is getting housing. And this is sort of a second step focus of why this happened to you and why it's important for you to pursue this as a civil rights issue. So we're sort of asking for all of your help. We are fully prepared. We stand shoulder to shoulder every day with people who've been discriminated against. We think it's incredibly important for people to come out about that because that, in part, is the remedy for the persistent strain of stigma and discrimination that people with the virus still face. And one of the ways to tamp down stigma, of course, is for people to be out about what's happened to them and to address that in some public way. I want to just talk about a single case of discrimination in the housing context because I think it's important to kind of put in focus what actually happens to people. And this is a case from only about a couple years ago. This isn't a case from the early 80s or the late 80s or the early 90s. This is stuff that happened the day before yesterday. there's a 75-year-old man who's both a reverend and a doctor, and he wanted to move to Arkansas to be closer to his daughter, and he needed to find a nursing home. And so Dr. Frank went with his daughter and looked at a number of places, found one that was acceptable to him, filled out all the paperwork, including all of his medical conditions, all the medications he's taking, all the kinds of things you have to do. There was never a problem. He moves in. The very next day, he is unceremoniously told, "We didn't realize you had HIV. You can't stay here anymore." After having moved, his whole life across the country. He was represented in a piece of litigation by the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, who does LGBT issues, but also very much at the forefront of HIV discrimination issues. There was a large settlement, the terms of which have not been disclosed, but I just want people to understand that that's very common for people to be still to be turned away from housing, to be turned away from nursing homes, medical care, and sort of implore all of you to try and work with us in encouraging people to come forward and to stand up for themselves. And if they're willing to stand up for themselves, I will stand shoulder to shoulder with each one of them. And together, we need to engage in this fight against discrimination and stigma together, because that's really the only way that we are going to be able to defeat it. Thank you.
First one they asked me was, how has housing changed your life? Two things you need to know. One, the blizzard of 1996. And the other one is the prodigal son. And I'll tie them both together in just a minute. But anyway, the blizzard of 1996, I was in an abandoned car. I had no idea that the blizzard was coming. And when I went to bed, or when I laid down in that car, which was my bed, I saw the ground. And when I woke up, I couldn't open the door because it had snowed that much. And I had on tennis shoes. The prodigal son, if you know the story, you remember that in the end, when he was with the pigs, and he was, working with the pigs, he suddenly had what I call the aha moment. And he said, "I'm going back to my father's house." When I woke up with that snow, I had that aha moment. And we all have them. I mean, if you don't, you're not living. Because you always have these times in life where you say, how in the world did I get here? And that was the question I had to ask myself. How in the world did I get there? Well, in June of 96, I finally got housing. I got Hopper housing, and it changed everything. For one, being HIV positive and not being able to take your medicine. In 96, in the early 90s, when the medicines first came out, one of the things that you had to do was, it was 3 medicines. One you took once a day, one you took twice a day, one you took 3 times a day. Now try to do that and be homeless. That's not going to work. So I got healthier because I got pneumonia from being in that blizzard, by the way. So the other question was, would I still be alive if I hadn't got housing? And the answer would be no. I wouldn't be alive. It's hard being homeless by itself, but being homeless and having a compromised immune system is not going to work. And what types of stigma or discrimination have you personally encountered? I remember when I first told my daughter's mother that I was HIV positive. And it's funny now. So, but it wasn't too funny then, but it's funny now. But she walked around the house, she had the rubber gloves on, and she had bleach in one hand and disinfectant in the other hand. And every time I would go use the bathroom, she would rush in the bathroom and wipe everything down that I used, and she had this plate, and this was my plate, and she put it up here on the shelf, and, you know, and one day I got tired. So what I did was I would go in the bathroom, and I would turn the water on, I would turn the water off, and I would come out, and she would run right in the bathroom and start cleaning everything. You know, and then I would do the same thing again, and we played this game the whole day. Seriously, this went on all day. And finally, but what it did do, it sparked a conversation. And that was the thing that changed her opinion, because, you know, a lot of people, discrimination is just plain ignorance. People just don't know. And it says, what other examples or stigma of discrimination are you aware of that others suffered? I'm also on a board of directors for quality of life. And quality of life is a retreat for people who are HIV positive. Not only am I on the board of director, I am a director for one of the retreats. And so people call me and say, "Are you still got room on the retreat? Can I come to the retreat?" and all that. But one that sticks in my mind more than anything else was this guy called me from Charlotte, West Virginia. And he said, "Mr. Coley, I don't care how much it costs, please have a spot for me. Because I can't talk to anybody down here. These people down here don't understand. I can't even go to the doctor and tell my doctor that I'm positive because they just don't get it. They will ridicule me. Can I please come to this retreat?" And of course, I said yes, and he came. And he cried most of the retreat. But it wasn't so much tears of sorrow, it was tears of joy, because he finally got around people that he could relate to and he could understand, and people that understood him. And that made all the difference. And matter of fact, we still talk today. That was almost 10 years ago. But that kind of discrimination still goes on from time to time. I mean, well, not from time to time, it goes on a lot. As you know, I'm a NAC board member, and as a NAC board member, one of the things that I have learned, or one of the things that I've known through being a board member, is that healthcare is housing, and housing is healthcare. You can't expect a person to get well if they have no place to get well at. And you can't expect anybody to be better or get better if they have nowhere to go at night. It's hard. Trust me, I've been there, did it. And how can public get greater involved in HIV housing and facilitate? Go to the NAC, the National AIDS Housing Coalition website, please. I implore you. Go there, become a member. Why, you might ask? Why, you might ask? Because one, NAC is one of the forerunners that goes to Congress. Nancy Bernstein and her staff, they go to Congress on a regular. They there all the time. They know who got dollars, who don't have dollars, who's supporting housing, who's not supporting housing. And when they need your voice, because that's what runs Congress, is our voice. Our voice is what tells Congress what to do. If they don't hear from us, then they think everything is hunky-dory. And that's not necessarily always true. So please go visit the website. In September, we're having a summit in New Orleans. And you were talking about John Hopkins. Forgot the guy's name again. Yeah, thank you. See, I know. He's been greatly involved in the summit. And you'll get a lot of information about research. You could go to the website. We have a policy toolkit where you can actually do a presentation. We have a PowerPoint there where you can talk. There are talking points there. You have to go there. There's a wealth of information, and become a member. So when it's time for us to need people to call Congress and tell them that we need more housing, we need more funds for housing, we can count on you. At least I can, and all the people that are like me can count on you to call Congress and say, look, this is an important issue, and we need fundings to fund this issue. And the last one is, as people become, they ask me, well, what more can be done? As people are starting to live longer, what I think can be done is people can start because people are working now, people that are HIV positive, and my idea is that maybe sometimes in the near future we can offer people that are HIV positive home ownership also. And as we get people off of HOPWA and into their own homes, that would open up some slots for people who really are trying to get to those slots.
Thank you for viewing Challenges to Developing Successful Supportive AIDS Housing Programs. For more information about the HOPWA program and HUD's resources, please visit www.hud.gov and search for the keyword HOPWA for more information about the federal response to HIV/AIDS and the National AIDS Strategy. Visit www.aids.gov. Information discussed on this video is also available on HUD's website, www.hud.gov. HUD is a partner for you in your effort to meet the housing needs of persons living with HIV/AIDS in your community.